gaining ground and I'm losing sleep over things I can't control. Oh Jesus, won't you comfort me? You're like a sunrise painted on the eastern sky, a fever breaking in the morning light. You're the hope that's keeping me alive all through the night. Yeah, when the worry in my chest burns like a fire, you cool it down like a gospel choir, singing to me everything'll be alright. It'll be alright. You're the only one I'm needing, and you're the only one who knows how to wipe away these tears, how to quiet all my fears, how to help me let it go. You're like a sunrise painted on the eastern sky, a fever breaking in the morning light. You're the hope that's keeping me alive all through the night. Yeah, when the worry in my chest burns like a fire, you cool me down like a gospel choir, singing to me everything'll be alright. It'll be alright. 'Cause you get me through the night. You get me through the night. You get me through the night. Oh, you get me through the night. Oh, you're like a sunrise painted on the eastern sky, a fever breaking in the morning light. You're the hope that's keeping me alive all through the night. Yeah, when the worry in my chest burns like a fire, you cool me down like a gospel choir, singing to me everything'll be alright. It'll be alright. You get me through the night. You get me through the night.
Hi, everybody. If you could all find your seats, that'd be great. One last fill up of coffee and hopefully take some more food so we don't have to hand it out on the way out. Yes. Well, welcome, everybody. Welcome to the first ever Re-Engage reunion here at Wooddale. So 20 years from now, when people are talking about the Re-Engage reunion, you can say, I was at the first one. Let me tell you how that one went. We're trying to do some things beyond just the Re-Engage sessions that we hold to keep people engaged, to keep people thinking about their marriages. You've probably all gotten the Staying Engaged emails. Hopefully you've read through those. Christine Stiff has done a wonderful job for us. This month, Stephanie and I are writing it, so that's why it's late.
And you guys, it's a bingo card square, so look for somebody who's read one.
Right. And then mark your calendars for Saturday evening, October 11th. You're all getting together to celebrate Stephanie's and my anniversary the next day. Actually, it's for something else, something pretty special that's going to happen then. So more to come on that. We'll be putting, once the details are finalized, we'll put that in the Staying Engaged email so you know what that's about. But it's going to be a really cool night that I think you'll all want to be a part of. So we've got a great day today, I think this morning anyway, of Pastor Brian is going to be speaking. We're going to take a little break after that for you guys to finish up your bingo cards. I'll explain a little more about that during the break. And then Dr. Bill Harley is going to speak after that. So I'm really looking forward to listening to both of these guys. A lot to help our marriages so that we can always just continue to grow in our marriage and grow in our relationship with the Lord. So I'm going to open us up in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for the gift of marriage. We pray that you would help us to remember to look at our spouse, our husband, our wife, as a gift to us that you gave us. You gave us the gift of your Son, which is the greatest gift of all, but you've also given us so many things, including our spouse. And we so often in this world, we lose focus of that. So we just pray that today you would speak through Brian, you'd speak through Dr. Harley, just to our hearts, to help us to see again just how important our spouse is to us and the joy that can come through our marriages because you've given it to us. So we just pray for your presence here today. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
So just a couple of housekeeping issues. Keep eating, that's first. Bathrooms, there's bathrooms right there, just as a reminder for those who haven't been down here for a while, just around the corner, and then down the hall that way. So that's where bathrooms are if you need those. And Jim kind of talked about the flow of the morning, so I think we're good there. So I think we're ready to kick off. So Pastor Brian, as we all know, is the outreach pastor and director of the Family Resource Initiative, which is right across the hall. And he is going to kick us off this morning, so thank you.
Thanks. Hey, Jim and Stephanie Teal have been amazing. Can we give them another hand? Everything that you're experiencing today has been because of them and their team, and it is just, I'm blown away. How many of you were part of the first Re-Engage class that we had here? All right, so several hands that are up there, and there have been so many that have gone through the program since you, and I cannot wait to be at that 20th anniversary and to say, look what God's done over the years of marriage ministry. The Lord has been at work here at Wooddale and in your families. And as we make marriage a priority, as we continue to say the things, those 14, 15 areas of Re-Engage, some of you were in here when it was a 16-week course, then it got moved down to a 14-week course. But those areas that we cover in Re-Engage have the ability to transform each one of us individually, to transform our families as we allow God to work through us. And you remember that very first week of Re-Engage, we had somebody get into a hula hoop, and we said that the only person that you can change is the person in that circle. And so easy to say that, so difficult to live that, I know. And I'm just so proud of all of you for the work that you've put into that. I had an opportunity this week to talk to somebody who their life's a train wreck. I mean, an absolute train wreck. And Pastor Dan and I were meeting with this person, and I shared that quote from week 1 of Re-Engage, and the person literally became enraged at that quote. You know, that the only person like, no, I'm the victim, and I just starts yelling in a restaurant. I'm like, oh my goodness. I mean, this is true, though, that I think for some of us, that's a hard thing to get. You know, we went into Re-Engage with the hopes of changing our spouse and kind of ignoring our own issues. But so many of us have come out of that and said, oh, like Paul David Tripp says in week 1, I'm my marriage's own biggest problem. And when we begin to see things that way, and we begin to recognize the role that we play, and that as God works on us, what he can do in a marriage is a beautiful thing. So I've been tasked with talking about communication in marriage, and I asked my wife not to come today because, I mean, really, come on. What guy wants to talk about communication in marriage in front of their spouse? It is really, I want to say with humility that as I speak on this, I'm a fellow voyager with you on this journey of communication. We don't have communication figured out after 34 years of marriage this summer. We're still figuring it out day by day, because if you remember back to the communication lesson in those 14 or 15 or 16 weeks, depending on your curriculum of this journey that you took, there's a line at the very beginning that says, you entered marriage speaking different languages. And maybe you finished Re-Engage and you are still speaking different languages. It says she speaks female, he speaks male, her family fought openly, his family never expressed feelings. In her culture, looking at someone directly in the eyes was a challenge. In his culture, looking someone directly in the eyes was respectful. Though you speak the same dialect, your natural responses, the words you choose, and your body language create interpretive challenges. And that is why the Bible instructs you to communicate carefully. And that's how that lesson on communication began. And so we have had a number of guest speakers over the years at Reengage on this topic of communication. And there have been a lot of things that have been learned. My goal today is to kind of go back and remember some of what we learned. And I've got this little phone here. It's not a full phone. It's just, this part of the phone. Remember when you talked on these kind of phones all the time? Like we didn't have these phones. And when Cindy and I were dating 37 years ago now, we were in college. And I remember the first time I saw Cindy. She has no clue about the first time she saw me, but I remember the first time I saw her. It was at chapel. She was friends with one of my brothers and my friends, and I remember Joy was walking with this girl from California, and I was like, "Oh, hoochie mama!" This was it. I was like, "This is woo!" I got to meet this girl. Whatever it takes, I'm going to meet this girl. And by the end of the semester, I'd met her. I don't think I'd talked to her more than 3 sentences though that whole time. I was so intimidated by her beauty. And it's beginning of our sophomore year, though, I mustered up the courage to ask Cindy on a date, and we went on that first date. And I remember that first date didn't end real well. We had both actually run for class office. I ran for sophomore class president at Liberty, and I got crushed in the election. Like thousands of people voted for the other candidate. And Cindy ran for vice president, and she lost by just a couple of votes. And our date was like this political, scandal. Our first date was the night of the election, and so we were going to go out to dinner, and then we were going to go back, and we were going to see what the election results were because we didn't have computer stuff. Anyway, it was going to be written in hand on the door who won the elections in the student government office, and so we go out on our date. I think we even went for ice cream, and then we were going to go see a movie, and we went back to campus to look at the election results. And Cindy saw that she lost, and she was crushed. I saw I lost. I was a 2-time loser now in student body elections. And so I was, okay with it. And she was like, I just think I need to be done. And she wanted to go talk to her girlfriends. And I was just convinced she had no interest in me whatsoever. And then a couple weeks later, we had another date. And after that date, it was just like the sparks were there, the chemistry was there, and the phone in the dorm room was there. And I remember I would take this phone that stood on the wall in the dorm room, and curfew, lights out, was like midnight or whatever, and we were supposed to be kind of quiet in the hall, and I just couldn't stop talking to this girl on the phone. I just wanted to keep talking, and I wanted to tell her how beautiful she was and how sweet she was, and we can meet for breakfast tomorrow, and they have those great donuts at the, maybe we can get some of those, and so I'd walk into the hallway, and by the end of the semester, this cord was like a tangled mess. It was just a mangled, awful. I would talk till 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm a guy, but I was like one of the Brady girls, all right? I'm wrapped up into my cord, just talking to this girl, because I'm just crazy about the woman that I'm talking to. And it was like I could talk to Cindy for hours. And Cindy just thought, man, what a guy. I'm dating this guy. He can communicate with the best. He can talk for hours upon hours upon hours. And then, we got married right after graduation. We were like babies, having babies, because 7 months after we got married, Cindy got pregnant. And, it was like our world changed like that after we said I do. The guy who couldn't stop communicating struggled to communicate after we got married. My wife's like, what happened to this man that could talk for hours on the phone when we weren't face-to-face, but when we are face-to-face, struggles to give me any more like, hey, how was your day? Good. And I'd say to Cindy, how was your day? Well, I woke up, and then I made coffee, and then after I made the coffee, I was thinking about the fact that you probably need a lunch, and I was trying to be sweet to you, and I wrote this letter for you, and then 45 minutes later, and while I'm in a daze, she's continuing to tell me about her day, and I just said, I'm fine. It was good. It was a good day. Because we come into marriage with such different orientations. And, eventually then those conversations were like, I'd say to my wife, so how are you doing? I'm fine. But sometimes I'm fine doesn't really mean I'm fine, right? And every couple has been through that. And every time I heard I'm fine, I just thought I was like the guy answering that, did my duty, asked how Cindy was doing. And the Lord took us to some really hard places in our marriage before he brought us to some places that were much better. And we don't have it all together again. I'm so excited about our next guest today because there was, at the toughest spot of our marriage, we were living in Moline, Illinois. I was a workaholic. I was ignoring my family, had no idea what it was doing to Cindy. At the toughest part of our marriage, God brought this little small group into our life where we were studying a curriculum called His Needs, Her Needs. And it was written by this guy over here who's going to speak later today. And there's a chapter in there about honesty and openness. And the way that this group worked, a little bit different than Reengage, similar in that you would read the book. We had a blue highlighter and a pink highlighter, and we'd highlight, and where the purple was, we paid special attention, where we were both kind of seeing the same things. But we'd stand up in front of this group of maybe 12 people, and we'd have to talk about how we did that week. And I remember in honesty and openness and communication, Cindy saying to me, "Brian, you're not honest. You tell me that you're going to come home for dinner at 5 o'clock, and it's 5:30, and you haven't even left the office, and I've had dinner waiting for a half hour with the kids. Or you tell me that you're, going to do this, and you do that." And I remember having to stand in front of this group at a church that I'm a pastor at and saying, "I'm a liar. I'm a liar. I haven't been honest. I haven't been open." And I wanted to blame somebody else. I wanted to say that, this is somebody else's problem. If I didn't have to work for such a demanding pastor, or these families weren't so crazy and their kids weren't falling apart, I wanted to blame everybody else for the fact that I wasn't being honest. And that was one of the moments that changed our marriage. The Bible has so much to say about communication in marriage. The verse that's up just at the opening slide here says, "Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as good for building up as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear." And as we begin, I want to begin with that premise. None of us can completely live that out, can we? I mean, if we could, our marriages would be perfect. Like what God calls us to in Ephesians, apart from His Holy Spirit working in us and God doing great things in us, is really an impossibility. And yet, that's the beautiful thing about God. He does give us His Spirit. And at our best, when we're walking with His Spirit and when we're living by our priorities, communication in marriage can go back to way more depth than the phone that was wrapped around me was in college. You can experience the depth in marriage no matter what stage of marriage you're at, like you've never seen before. And so again, I want to acknowledge you have done some great work, so many of you. And many of you, when you were in the class, what Reengage did for you is it gave you something to communicate about. For 14 weeks, you had something to communicate about. One of those weeks was on communication, but you started to communicate about things like honesty and openness. You started to communicate about, I need to make amends about this area. Or you started to communicate about what does spiritual intimacy really look like in our life? What is our physical intimacy like? What's our emotional intimacy like? You communicated about things like finances and your dreams. And what Reengage gave you for 14 weeks or 16 weeks was the opportunity to have a date, if you want, for lack of a better word, every week where you were intentionally communicating about the state of your relationship. And if you're like us, the group ends, and it's really easy to put the book away and to just let it get dusty and sit on the shelf and to get lazy again about those practices. So our hope for the Reengage reunion, one of the hopes is just that, hey, this could be a shot in the arm to get back to doing something great in your relationship, to remember what it was. And so I'm going to give you a chance throughout the day to turn to your spouse and to just have a little conversation. The first one is this. What's one thing that your spouse said this week that made you feel loved? All right, so I'm going to make you think about it, all right? And you have to come up with one, all right? And if there was none there, make something. No, do your best to think of what's one thing that your spouse said this week that made you feel loved. And I'm only going to give you 30 seconds. You get 60 seconds, 30 seconds each. Go. All right, Schulenburgs are done. See? How's your week? Good, good. But we said more than good. We got it done. I know you can do it, all right? So I will never get done up here if I let you speak much longer, but we're going to give you some chances throughout the day to turn to your spouse and share a little bit. Luke 6:45 says this, a good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings up evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. And I want you to catch the end of this. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. King James Version says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I've shared before, there's a book I read years ago called It Came From Within. And it's this book that has kind of these monsters on the cover, like the 1940s monster movies. And the premise of the book is the scariest monster in the world is the one that's in our heart. Scripture says elsewhere, the heart is deceitfully wicked. And we need a Savior to take care of that. And when it comes to communication, it's more than just words. It reflects the condition of our hearts. Oftentimes, in our communication, we struggle because our hearts just aren't where they need to be. Our hearts aren't where they need to be with the Lord. We're struggling. And so I want to encourage you to continue to prioritize God in this thing. And so we're going to kind of begin with the biblical foundation of communication. We're going to hit several areas today, but we're going to start with what does God say about this thing? In Genesis 2:24 and 25, we see that God is the author of communication. And it's a verse that simply says this, Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed. And what it does is that those verses demonstrate the fact that in their nakedness, in their unashamedness, that there was this openness that they had toward each other. There was this trust that they had with each other, that prior to the time that sin entered the world, the norm for the husband and the wife was to be able to just, we're naked and unashamed. We have openness and trust in that communication. And you see later in Genesis 3 where they sin, and God used to walk among them as a friend would walk amongst another friend. And there's this idea that of communication being kind of the basis of friendship and the beauty of what God does. In James 1:19, we read, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry. James has been called the Proverbs of the New Testament. But there's just this practical instruction. Ephesians 4:29 talks about words, not words building up and not tearing each other down. And so all over Scripture, we see this beautiful picture of communication, the idea that communication is God's idea, that God is the author of communication. And Paul Tripp, who, again, gives that very first quote in the Re-Engage book about us being our own biggest marital problem, says this about communication. He says, your words shape the life of your marriage. Every word spoken is an opportunity to minister to your spouse or to harm them. I think that's a profound truth. I think back just on the past week in our own marriage. And we've had a pretty good week. We've had a crazy week. Some health issues with our Cindy's mom and some other things that have been going on. And there are opportunities in every one of our weeks as those pressures come up to build up or to tear down. And the words that we choose can shape things. Just yesterday, Cindy and I were in the car, and I kind of blew it. She was talking. I interrupted her and made an assumption on what she was saying. But I caught myself. And I stopped and I said, and basically said, Cindy, I see what I'm doing and I'm sorry. I'm going to be quiet and just let you finish. Because what she was saying was very different than what it was that I was responding to. And the words that I were saying weren't words that were meant to tear down, but they were words that had nothing to do whatsoever with what the real issue was. And so even good words, even words where, guys, we tend to be fixers, right? So our wife starts to tell us something, and we're like ready to just cut her off and tell her, I know what you need to do. Here's what the solution is. She goes, you don't even know what the problem is yet. I need a few more minutes to tell you what that is. And we're like, well, no, I got it. And we're starting to, our mind is going toward what the end of that solution is. And in trying to help, we cause more harm instead of just stopping and listening. So every word spoken is that opportunity. Francis Chan talks about marriage, and as we think about this biblical foundation for communication, Chan says this. He says, marriage is one of the most powerful ways we show the gospel to the world. because in every marriage, we're going to have opportunities every day, and in the Schulenburg house, because of this guy, multiple hours of the day, to show each other grace and to demonstrate that. Or to be like the rest of the world and just say, this is too hard, I'm done. Out. Finished. Aren't you glad God didn't do that with us? That's what I mean by the gospel. We have a God who pursues us. He pursues us at our worst. He didn't say, I'm going to wait till Schulenburg's all fixed up and then I'm going to show him love. He said, no, I'm going to take this guy who's just a mess and I'm going to show him the full extent of my love as he is. When we show that kind of grace, we show this incredible picture to the world, okay? So discussion, question number 2. In what ways do your words reflect the state of your heart toward your spouse? Again, just 30 seconds. I'm going to make you do these fast today because we want to keep it moving. In what ways do your words reflect the state of your heart toward your spouse? Go. Man, thought this re-engage reunion was supposed to be just all fun and games. Like we weren't supposed to have any hard time. We're back to doing homework here, all right? But I hope that those are kind of the conversations that can help you as you continue to move forward in that. And so the Bible just says, hey, there is so much about marriage that reflects the character of God and the heart of God and an opportunity to present the gospel. But I want to take a look, too, at what I want to call the science and psychology of communication. And when Jim and Patty Robinson were here, and we've had some speakers at our Lunch and Learns that have also shared a little bit of the research of John and Julie Gottman, they talked about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in communication. So these are not the ones from Revelation, all right? These are like, but if we practice these 4 areas in our marriage, we're going to be in a little bit of trouble. And so those areas that we talk about, number 1 is criticism. For some of us, our native language when it comes to our spouse is criticism. And for definition purposes, we're just going to call that attacking the person instead of the problem. So that might look like you never follow through with what you said you were going to do. Like, I have to make dinner and do the dishes. You promised me you were going to do the dishes if I made it. You never do that. You are such a failure, or you promised me that you would do this. And so you get it, criticism, number 1. Defensiveness is number 2. It's rejecting feedback and shifting blame. And so Cindy shares with me, Brian, you never let me finish that conversation. And so I didn't even get to really tell you what my heart was about this before you tried to fix that. And I said, well, Cindy, no. We've dealt with this situation before. And I mean, I know what your father is like. And if we would just do this, and she's going, no, you don't. This is a totally different. But I've got this defensiveness that comes up rather than dealing with it head on. For some, and this is the 3rd horseman of the apocalypse is a huge one. It's the word contempt. I don't even like saying that word, right? Like, it's disrespect. It's superiority over the other person. It is where we have moved so far past these first 2 horsemen that we're just like, I can't even stand to see that person in the morning. Those who are at the spot of contempt in their relationship are oftentimes sleeping in different beds. Like, we've moved past disrespect just in communication, but we're like doing everything we can. We're all of a sudden filling up all of our time with hobbies apart from each other because just being around each other makes us, our stomachs hurt. We can't stand being around that. Gottman says that this one here is the number 1 predictor for divorce. And so if you want to know if you're working with a couple, if they are headed on their way to divorce, like something like 90% of couples who live in contempt, the marriage is over soon, unless you begin to turn that around. And number 4 is stonewalling. So that's shutting down emotionally. It's kind of like where your spouse is talking to you, your back's like this. I'm not even listening to you anymore. Or they're looking at you and there's no facial expression. You're kind of just tolerating. I'm here and that's kind of where I'm going to be. And when it comes to kind of the science and the psychology of communication, the Gottmans have, John Gottman in particular with his partner, did all sorts of research with couples. They monitored these couples. They had video cameras. I would never have volunteered for this study, right? There was 3 cameras in every home. They've got monitors that they're wearing in their day-to-day life to show how physiologically they're responding to the research about their marriage. And they could predict, based on the physiological responses and the communication patterns in the marriage, whether or not that marriage was going to stick together with about 70% certainty. Unbelievable. Now, I'm glad that they also came up with some solutions at that Gottman Institute. And so for number 1, they said this, that soft startups. So if criticism is the number 1 kind of horseman of the apocalypse, they said, listen, a way to change that in your communication patterns would be, instead of saying you never listen, own it. Say, I feel unheard when. You remember when we talked about that in Reengage? It was in your communication lesson. It was the very first one. And it's about kind of that assertiveness and active listening. We're Minnesotans. And that assertiveness thing is like a foreign language for us. I remember when I was a pastor in Woodbury, Minnesota, I hired a youth pastor from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And the former youth pastor loved to use the Message paraphrase of the Bible with the kids because he's like, they can understand it. And the very first week, the guy from Philadelphia is there. He goes, all right, we're getting rid of these Bibles. These are garbage. These are absolute garbage. I can't believe you guys have been using this garbage, all right? And then he would just throw stuff left and right and just assertive to the core. And my Minnesota kids and families are like, who is this Philadelphia youth pastor who has come to Minnesota to love our kids? And yet assertiveness, when used correctly, is a beautiful gift. Assertiveness is just simply the ability to share what it is that you want or you need. And so many of us struggle with that because we've been told these messages like it's not polite. You're really just taking too much of a risk there if you go out on a limb there and share what it is you like. But I want to suggest to you it's not polite to not be assertive, to not share what it is that you need, to not share what it is that you're feeling. And so those are statements then that begin with I feel unheard, or I feel understood when, or I would like. So soft startups. Number 2, this is for defensiveness. Take responsibility. If you're in a spot where your initial response is, I'm going to put my defensive barrier up there, the antidote to that is no, take responsibility. Own your part in the conflict. Recognize. When Cindy and I were just talking about, hey, what went well this week, she said, I loved when you stopped what you were doing and you said, I made a mistake there. And let's just restart. And recognizing that we need to own our parts in that conflict. What about contempt? Well, we need to look for ways in contentment to build fondness and admiration. And this is again the hardest one. Because if you're already at contempt, how in the world are you supposed to speak life into your spouse? There was a film that came out years ago called Fireproof. It was one of those Kendrick brother films. And I had somebody bring it up to me in the past couple of weeks because they had found out that a family member had been involved in an affair. And it was an emotional affair. There was nothing sexually, but it was an affair. It was an affair of the heart. And her relative, just heart was broken. The offended party here. And the one who, had really caused contempt in a relationship, it's like, I want to do whatever I can, right, to work my way back. And so she recommended that movie Fireproof and that love dare to that family member. I'll never forget the response was, well, no, I've done that before. I don't want anything to do with that. I mean, there's work that has to go into building that relationship back. So how are we looking for opportunities? And if you want to stop contempt from ever starting, this has got to be a regular part of our relationships. Like every relationship. When Cindy and I were on the phone and I'm wrapping myself up in this cord, you know what I'm doing to her? Speaking life into her. Telling her all the things about her that I'm just crazy about. And how I can't wait to see her tomorrow. And I can't wait to talk. And I know, I don't want to, you hang up first. You know, there was this life, right, that was being spoken in. And while that was maybe a little bit of an immature, college-y, romantic love, there's still time in our relationships to be a little bit immature and romantic-y in your relationship. Guys, like, take a risk. Remember what you did when you started to woo your spouse. So build fondness and affirmation into the relationship. And then for number 4, for that stonewalling, we talk about self-soothing. It is okay to take breaks. It is okay sometimes to walk away and to say, I need to take 45 minutes, an hour. And we talked about this in the conflict resolution chapter, about how sometimes we just need to take a break. But do you remember what we do when we take a break? We schedule a time to come back and to talk about that. So many of us want to do the self-soothing, and we want to take the break, and, okay, man, we're going fishing. Like, I'm going with my neighbor. We're going on the fishing boat, and we're going to cast a line out there, and I'm not coming back till my wife's asleep. And that's not going to help anybody if we don't have a time that we're coming back to talk about that. So go fishing. Make sure that you set a time where you're going to come back on that. So the Gottmans have written an incredible book, and Jim and Patty shared this book with me. They're doing a seminar for a bunch of pastors from all around the Twin Cities here in a few weeks. And it's this beautiful thing that the Twin Cities Marriage Initiative does for these ministry couples. And they said, hey, would the Family Resource Initiative buy some books? I said, sure, what books do you want? And they said, well, one of them we want is this book, 8 Great Dates by John and Julie Gottman. And I cannot recommend this highly enough. Now, my wife doesn't know, but she's getting this as a gift today from me, and we're going to do some of these dates today. So I just got these books in. And as I was looking at it this week, guys, I'm so excited. I cannot wait to do this with my wife. Because I was flipping through some of these, and the dates are purposeful dates to help you communicate. So it's literally essential conversations for a lifetime of love. And so the idea is a little bit like Reengage. You have some homework to do before your date. Sorry, guys, it's not just a date. You take her to the T-Wolves game and get some pizza and call it a day, all right? Like, you actually get to work on it a little bit ahead of time. And there's some questions you ask, but the T-Wolves game is not out of the picture in this date thing, okay? And so the dates are, date 1, lean on me, where we talk about trust and contentment. Date 2 is agree to disagree, where we address conflict. Wow, that's going to be a great date, right? Date 3 is sex and intimacy. Well, great, that one's after conflict, all right? Date 4 is work and money. Date 5 is family. Date 6 is play with me, fun and adventure. Date 7, something to believe in, growth and spirituality. And date 8 is a lifetime of love, and it's about your dreams. So I was looking at the one about money because, I'm a guy. And so as I'm reading that one of the things it talked about was to go on an inexpensive date. I was like, I like this one. All right. And so it said, remember what you used to do when you were, like, dating, when you were younger. And maybe you started with expensive dates, so you guys go ahead and do that. I know Cindy and me, it was like we went to Peaksview Park and we made out and got ice cream afterwards. It was a great date. So what's that date, right, that you did when you were younger, but there's some questions that you never asked when you were younger that are a part of that kind of go deeper into communication as it relates to money, and what are some of those dreams, and what are some of those hopes. And so just some thoughts on these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I'm going to skip this discussion question to keep us moving forward, but I want to talk about just some practical skills for better communication. And we're going to start with the power of active listening. This is one we hit heavily in Reengage. And it's the one that, again, I think we struggle with the most. Because any of us who had psychology 1-on-1 in college, you remember, like, when you started talking about active listening. I'll never forget that. It was my freshman year of college. I had this professor. His name was Dr. Captain. Very first day of class, he walks into class. He's like, good morning, class. I'm Dr. Captain. Welcome to Introduction to Psychology. I thought, this is the weirdest professor in the world, all right? He literally made the whole class stand up, put their arms in front of them, give themselves a hug, and say, I am special, to start the class every day. I'm like, what is up with you, you strange man? But he did that every day for the remainder of the semester. And I'll never forget why. Because he was convinced that in his class, it was one of these big classrooms with 300 college freshmen, big lecture hall, required class. He said, I'm convinced that in this class are people who were created with infinite worth and value that God wants to use to change the world. And I'm convinced about that too. I'm never going to stand up in front of you and do what Dr. Captain did. But I am going to stand up in front of you all the time and tell you, each one of you, no matter the state of your marriage, is that person. You've got this infinite worth and value. And as we sat in that class in psychology and we started to talk about active listening and assertiveness, it's really hard for me because I came from about the most unassertive family you could come from, and I was the middle child in that unassertive family, which means that you just don't ever rock the waves. You're the peacemaker in the family when you're the middle child. And so being assertive was not my native language. And active listening just sounded weird. So I hear what you're saying is, or so what you're trying to say, you're just trying to rephrase. And yet there's such power in that. And if you go back and take some time in your re-engage lessons, I think re-engage does it so much better than the introduction to psychology class did. And where I run into so much trouble in my marriage sometimes is the lack of the active listening. It was Leslie Parrott who said, genuine listening means suspending judgment, being fully present, and my wife and kids tell me that this means I'm not fully present when I'm in a conversation. Apparently I have to put this away, right? Like that's part of being fully present. Duh. And seeking to understand before being understood. That's a beautiful definition of what genuine listening is. And so even taking those four statements, okay, so what does it mean in this conversation for me to just suspend judgment? In other words, I'm just going to listen with an open heart. I'm going to wait till Cindy's done before I interject. What does it mean to be fully present? To put that away, but not just put that away, but for ADD Brian not to listen when we're at dinner to the conversation at that table and that table and that table because I can, but to listen just to the conversation here. I used to think it was funny when we were dating to be like, hey, Cindy, you know what they're talking about? And then she's like, I don't know. She liked me enough to still marry me. I don't know. But it was like, it wasn't as funny when we got married. To seek to understand before being understood. So many of us, we get that out of order. It's a beautiful, beautiful definition and a way to do that. And again, this is one that you can take a picture of the screen. You can do this at home, but I want you to practice this week some reflective listening. You did it in these weeks of re-engage. One spouse shares a thought, the other repeats back what they heard. One spouse shares a thought, the other repeats back what they heard. And by the way, when the other repeats back what they heard, if the spouse who shared the thought is not hearing what you shared, then you get to be assertive, and you get to say, well, that's not quite what I was saying. Here's what I meant. And those conversations. I was talking to Don Grewak before we started today, and he was talking about the lesson in the current version of Reengage. So those who are currently in Reengage, we had a phenomenal speaker, Bob Lineberger from Plymouth Covenant Church here just a few weeks back. And Bob uses 3 words. What are they, guys? Anybody know? Tell me more, all right? Yeah, tell me more. And so if you don't get it or you struggle with active listening, those 3 words are beautiful words, all right? And if you think that your spouse is done, maybe to say, tell me more. Tell me a little bit more, and tell me a little bit more. You did it when you were dating. It's time to get back to that, all right? So number 2, understand your spouse's communication style. And I love Gary Smalley. Years ago, I read a book by Gary Smalley, or I saw a talk by Gary Smalley where he talked about the different personality types. How many of you remember hearing about the lion, the otter, the golden retriever, and the beaver at some point in your life, all right? So he basically takes human personality and turns it into an animal, all right? So you got the strengths. The lion is a leader, a visionary, a president, or persistent, I think he might be the president, direct, strong-willed, decisive. But the weaknesses are that person can be insensitive and impatient and stubborn and controlling, cold and self-sufficient. And oftentimes the lion-type personalities are really attracted to the golden retriever-type personalities, all right? So you kind of see like the opposite attracts. So the golden retriever has this calm, and they're supportive, and they're loyal, and they're diplomatic, and they're humorous, and they're really consistent people. But their weaknesses are they're indirect, and they resist change, and they're a worrier, and they can be codependent and indecisive, and they lack initiative. Some of you are otters. Your strengths are that you're outgoing, responsive, enthusiastic, compassionate, friendly, and talkative. But your weaknesses might be that you're a little bit impulsive or undisciplined or unproductive, or you tend to exaggerate, or you need approval, or you're easily offended. Boy, I used to think I was a golden retriever. I'm pretty confident I'm an otter today. All right, and then there's the beaver. And their strengths, they're analytical, and they're decision makers. They're industrious, they're organized, they're deliberate, they're self-disciplined. Their weaknesses can be they're moody and unsociable and touchy and self-centered and critical and negative. Those are power-packed personalities that go well beyond I'm an introvert and I'm an extrovert. We're all complex creatures. For some of you, you love to use the Gallup Strengths Finder deal, and you've taken that at work, and you try to maybe relate that to what that looks like as a family. So you might be like, I'm an ideation person, or I'm an intellectual, or I'm a context person, or I'm a person that just needs to get input from others in my life, or I'm a futurist, or whatever it is. But have a conversation with your spouse again this week about what is your personality. And a funny thing happened when Cindy and I got married, and we went from 1 year to 2 years to 5 years to 10 years to 15 years to 20 to 25 to 30 to 34 this summer. What happened is we changed in those 34 years. And the guy that Cindy married in college isn't the same guy that she's married to today. There have been some hurts and some pains and some challenges and some struggles and some learnings and some growth and some jobs and some different places and 4 children and 4 grandchildren and a mom who died and a dad who died and a father-in-law who died. And all of those things shape who you are. And while fundamentally there may be parts of your personality that will never change, we are not the same person that we were when we got married. And so have a conversation about that personality type this week. Gary Chapman did a similar thing, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one. There's a book called The 5 Love Languages next to Bill Harley's books. This one's pretty good, too. They're both in the top 10 bestsellers for Christian books on marriage. And the 5 love languages, Chapman talks about, we all primarily have a love language. It's words of affirmation or acts of service or receiving gifts or quality time or physical touch. And Focus on the Family did a really nice comparison chart on this. And this one you may have to take a picture and blow up, okay? I just want to talk about the third column here. When it comes to communication, if you're a words of affirmation person, what do you need in communication? And how are you going to give love in communication? Well, you're probably somebody who needs encouraging words, compliments, and an affirming spirit. If that is your top love language and you're not receiving that, that can be an indicator that you are going to be susceptible to somebody else showing you those gifts. And that's a little bit of what His Needs, Her Needs talks about. When our primary needs aren't being met in marriage and they are being met somewhere else, we find ourselves susceptible to the affair or to walking away. So know your spouse's love language. Quality time. If that's your love language, then communication is going to be quiet places with no interruptions, undivided attention, one-to-one conversations. If receiving gifts, if it's your love language, then communication-wise, private giving of gifts, pleasant facial expressions. Those are gifts that we give to each other. Acts of service. When you hear words like, what can I do for you? Or I'm going to stop by on the way home from work today at the grocery store. Is there something that you need? Or today I did blank for you. Those are ways that you communicate love to the person where acts of service is their primary love language. And for the person who has physical touch, well, pleasant facial expressions, nonverbal communication as you're talking with that person are important. Putting your arm around them. To that person where physical touch is that. Sometimes just holding hands and looking at each other in the eye as you're having. It's not just that conversation across the table, but that physical touch person, they just want to hold hands when they're talking, or they want your arm around them, or they want to be close, or they want to sit on the couch next to each other and have that conversation. So understand what that love language is so that we can show that. And this week I want to encourage you, have a conversation with your spouse about their communication style or love language and how you can better speak in that language, all right? So what can we do to better speak that language? We are almost done here, but I want to talk about how do we overcome conflict. Because, again, all of these are related to communication. And in the Reengage curriculum, conflict is like a chapter in and of itself, and yet it is wrapped in communication. And so conflict is inevitable. Every relationship's going to have it, but growth is optional. Conflict is inevitable, but growth is optional. you can choose whether or not you want to look at conflict as an opportunity to grow or if it's going to be the thing that just divides you in a relationship. So much of who Cindy and I are as a couple today has been forged in the crucible of conflict. Any marriage that's more than 3 decades old has conflict. And we could tell the war stories of our lives, of the conflicts that we have come through, that God has brought us through and have shown us how to love each other in a deeper and a more beautiful way. Dennis Rainey, Family Life Today, Weekend to Remember conference guy, says this: marriages don't collapse from a single blow. They crumble from slow erosion of neglect. Marriages don't collapse from a single blow. That fight that was the straw that broke the camel's back isn't what eroded the marriage. It was all the stuff that happened before that we chose to neglect. So when we're dealing with conflict, the key is to deal with it, to look for the opportunity. Neglect is to say, I'm going through conflict, and I'm a conflict avoider, and I'm going to do everything I can to avoid that conflict. And if that is your posture toward conflict, you're headed for trouble. A gentle answer, Proverbs 15:1 says, turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So how do we handle conflict in a healthy way? Well, number one, I want to say this: pause and pray before responding. There was a moment just in the past couple of weeks where Cindy and I weren't necessarily in a conflict, but we were at a spot in our life where we just didn't know what to do. And so the conversations were happening, and this guy tends to make it bigger than it needs to be. I can catastrophize with the best of them. And so there was a moment where we just had to say, stop. Let's pause. Let's pray. Let's seek God on this. Because God's not a God of the catastrophizing. God is not a God who is not a God of order. God is a God who has a solution for all of these things if we're willing to work. So let's pause and let's pray before responding. Again, there's those you statements. Use the I statements instead of you accusations. I feel hurt rather than you always. So take ownership. 3, clarify and validate feelings. I hear you're feeling overwhelmed. What would help you feel supported? How can I help you, Cindy, with what you're going through, with whatever? What can I do to help in that situation? And then seek reconciliation, not victory. Some of you are competitive. Oh, my goodness, we are competitive. You do not want to play games against the Schulenburgs, all right? I mean, you'll lose, I promise you, but we'll take you on in game night, all right? We love competition. When the two of us are competing against each other, we were just on a cruise in February. It was awesome. Every night in that cruise, we had a spades tournament that the two of us, were doing. It was a week-long cruise thing, and I won't say who won, but it was awesome. All right, so in marriage, marriage is not, though, a victory. It's not a competition to be won. Conflict isn't a competition to be won. It's about reconciliation. And so many of us, we kind of view that. If you're in sales in a job, or you're competing against others on a daily basis for getting the client or doing that. Like another part of my life, I do real estate. I love when 3 realtors meet with somebody and we walk out with the client. It's just like, yes, we won. It's that competition, right? But that's not what marriage is. That's not what conflict in marriage is about. So seek reconciliation, not victory. So the discussion question again for later this week, because we got to keep moving, is how do you typically respond in conflict, and what's one thing that you can do differently to de-escalate conflict, all right? And we're going to just end. I'm going to put 2 questions up. So these are the questions I want you to really pay attention to this weekend. What is one specific way that you can improve how you listen to your spouse? And what is one change that you will make this week to communicate with more love and grace? Dr. Harley is going to be giving books to everybody today because he's amazing, and so you're going to get that. I have 2 books here on the Gottmans' 8 dates because I promised my wife she gets one of them, all right? So here's what I want to find out as we end here today. How many of you have an anniversary this month? So where are my March anniversary people? Just one couple? Congratulations, March couple. All right, you get a wonderful date night. All right. Nobody gets married in March. And then who drove the furthest today, other than our speakers? Because I know you guys drove from White Bear Lake. Is that right? Anybody go farther than White Bear Lake? Farmington. All right, here we go. Agramson's 8 great dates. Enjoy, enjoy. Thank you for letting me share with you today. Let me pray for you, and I'll turn it over. God, thank you so much for the love you have for us. And Lord, I thank you that communication in marriage is not something that we arrive at. It's not something that we just kind of figure out and we've solved it and we're there for the rest of our lives. But God, that you as a relational God created us as relational beings in your image, and that we get to continue to grow in this area of communication year by year. Lord, if we are married today and our spouse is here with us today, thank you that we have another chance today and this week to do better in this area of communication. Lord, that spouse who at one time we had a hard time hanging up the phone with them is right next to us today. And so spouses, as we pray, I'm just going to ask you, if you're next to your spouse, would you just grab their hand right now? And would you just, as you're holding their hand, would you just squeeze them? My wife and I will sit in church and we'll just squeeze each other's hand 3 times to say, I love you. Because we're competitive, Cindy will do 4 times to say, I love you most. But Lord, thank you for the gift of this person whose hand we get to hold right now. Help me to continue to treasure him or her. God, help me to see the spouse that you've given me with your eyes. Help me to respond with your heart, as they are your precious gift to me. God, help me to discover something new about my spouse this week through a conversation that I didn't know. And Lord, help me to love my spouse more next Saturday than I love him or her this Saturday, because of how we've grown this week. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks so much. So much to take from that. Stephanie and I have talked about this in the last few weeks so often. Pause and pray before responding. And we even talked about it during one of Brian's questions. Well, I'll stay in my circle. I'm really good at quick responses that I regret about 5 seconds later. So to pray and pause for a second is great. And for husbands, feel free to describe your wives using the phrase hoochie mama. Brian does not have that trademarked, so it's open for anybody. I just want to thank you, Brian, for your honesty, for being willing to share the things that you work on, and for Cindy for letting him talk about your guys' marriage, and for both of you for your hearts for people and for marriage. It's just fantastic. For those of you that might need people to talk to about your marriage, Brian and the Family Resource Initiative is right across the hall. That's where they office. So we're going to take a break. We're going to take a break and be back at 11 o'clock. During the break, there is a ton of coffee and food out there. You won't be allowed to leave today unless that's all gone, so you might want to take care of it as fast as you can. Your bingo cards. So you're doing a normal bingo. You don't have to get every single square, either a column or horizontal or even diagonal. If you get a bingo, you can take that card to this gentleman, Scott Fronick, and also to this gentleman over there who doesn't know it, Todd Thievis. And if you take your card to him, we do have Price Waterhouse here to audit your card to make sure it's authentic, because you can only have one person sign one time. You can't just go and have them fill out every square. But we're giving away Chick-fil-A cards, so hopefully everybody likes Chick-fil-A. So be back at 11 o'clock. Thanks.
All right, if everybody can find their seats again, we will get ourselves started. We have a few gentlemen that will be handing out a handout and a book per couple, so just look for them as they come around. So our next speaker is Dr. Harley. I was just visiting with him. I had read his little bio on his website too, but he's got kind of an interesting past. He started in AI in 1962, if I remember that, somehow ended up in psychology, has run a counseling office for a number of years, and now has a website that is entitled Marriage Builders that they launched in 1995. He's been a speaker here a few times for our Lunch and Learn, so if you want to go back and look for him, you could find previous talks he did there. And we are just really thankful that Dr. Harley and his wife Joyce joined us today, and let's give them a warm welcome.
Joyce, I think I'd like you to come up. I'd like you to come up first. I asked Joyce, I said, would you like to come up before I begin? No, I don't want to come up. No, come on up.
I'm going to stand right here.
No, come on up here because the lights are, everybody can see you. Really? Okay, I'll come down here. I'll come down here with Joyce. Joyce is the love of my life. I am into marriage counseling as a career. I'm actually a clinical psychologist, and I can help you with depression, anxiety, obsessive-compulsive problems. I can help you even with psychotic episodes. But I've chosen to go into marriage therapy as a primary approach to marriage, approach to life, because a great marriage solves so many emotional problems. And some people have argued that the reason that we're having a bad marriage is because my spouse is crazy. Well, as a clinical psychologist, I can diagnose people pretty fast. And a lot of times what I've said is, before we get into the mental problems of your spouse, let's talk about your marriage. And let's see if we can save your marriage. And then after we're done doing that, we'll see whether or not you've got obsessive-compulsive problems. Well, Joyce and I have been married for 62 years. And I would say that my mental health and her mental health are in great shape because we've had a great marriage for 62 years.
And I was just 5 years old. I had this little wedding dress. And
And I want you all to recognize that having a great marriage in life is one of the best life experiences of all time. And so you need to go to a great deal of trouble to make sure you have that, because once you have it, there's not much trouble after that. You don't have to do much after that to keep it that way. So anyway, I want to introduce you to my wife. We do a radio show.
I don't usually take the microphone away from him, but I want to sit down, and I know I want to share this information with you. We do a podcast. It's called Marriage Builders Radio. I used to be with KTIS Radio, and then I went to KKMS Radio. Bill had a radio show on that station. He had a show on that station as well, and occasionally he would be my guest on my show, and it was very popular. So we decided to team up, and we do a podcast now. And the reason I bring this up is because when you get into his needs, her needs, you may have questions. Or after what you hear Dr. Harley talk about Dr. Harley, Bill talk about today, you may want to have some questions as well. Something
She shows me great respect.
And so make sure and email us. And what happens is when you email us, we address your question on the show. I change your name. And anything I think that might be a giveaway of who you are, I make some changes so that you can feel free to be anonymous in your questions, okay? But we would love you to take advantage of that. Something is not clear, we want to make it clear for you. So it's mbradio@marriagebuilders.com, mbradio@marriagebuilders.com. And we look forward to hearing from you. I email you after the show to let you know that we discussed your email, and then you have a couple of days to listen to it. You could actually memorize the answer. You could listen to so many times. But anyway, we'd love to be a part of your life and the questions, concerns that you might have, so take advantage of this offering. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a, thank you, Joyce. We have a YouTube channel in addition to our app that you can listen to, or you can see it, you can listen to the show on the radio, on our website. But we just this weekend started Spotify. We have a Spotify channel now. And so we have thousands of shows. We just recently, I was just looking up shows that we could make available on Spotify. We have an archive. And I think we are now up to something like 15,000 shows. So we've been doing this for quite a while. I want to begin by starting at a point where you should all begin. And that is the definition of marriage. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to kind of work you through the whole concept of marriage to help you understand what it is, and if you have a marriage problem, how to solve it. So we begin with a definition, and it's in the first chapter of the book that I gave you, His Needs, Her Needs. Marriage is a relationship of mutual extraordinary care. That's what it is. I don't think too many people would disagree with me on that. I think most people recognize that that's what they're supposed to do when they get married, when they say I do, but what are you saying I do too? And I think that the concept that I will care for you in an extraordinary way for the rest of my life is, if it's not specifically said, it's certainly implied when you make your marriage vows. So if we can all agree that marriage is a relationship of extraordinary care, then let's break that down into what it means in actual habits and behavior that you have. And the meaning comes in three parts. The first part is, what can I do to make you happy and fulfilled in life? That's the first part. What can I do? And I call it meeting emotional needs. What can I do for you that would be something you need that I can provide? I can meet that need for you. The second part is avoid hurting each other. Now, see, it seems to me it goes without saying that if you care for somebody in an extraordinary way, you're not going to hurt them. But my experience in counseling people that have marital problems is that in marriage, you can hurt each other more than you can hurt anyone else. And you can hurt each other longer than you'd ever allow anyone else to hurt you or be hurt, because you can't escape. Now, if I have a friend that is disrespectful and I don't like the way he jokes around about me, I just won't see him anymore. I just won't be with him. I don't have to show up. I don't have to return his phone calls. I don't have to return his email. I can get out of a relationship really fast, and I have throughout my lifetime. When I don't like somebody, they don't see me anymore. In marriage, you are stuck with this person until you make the horrific decision to end the relationship altogether, and it is mind-numbing to think about what people have to go through during a divorce. So getting away from somebody that is causing you problems is a lot of trouble when you're married. The third part of extraordinary care is making decisions that benefit both of you simultaneously. Joyce and I are partners in life. We are very good friends, and we build our lives together as a team. We're a team. And we make our decisions jointly. Okay, those are the 3 ways of expressing extraordinary care. Let me go through them one more time. You do the things that make each other happy. You fulfill each other, and I have identified 10 ways of doing that in the book that I just gave you, His Needs, Her Needs. The 10 ways are showing affection, communicating with care and love, conversation, sexual fulfillment in life, recreational companionship, honesty and openness, which I will be focusing on this morning, physical attractiveness, domestic support, family commitment, financial support, and admiration. Those are the 10. Now, what's interesting about those 10 is that I came up with the 10 because I asked people, what can you do? What can your spouse do for you that would make you the happiest? And these are the 10 things that came up consistently. Now, having an engineering mind, my background is in engineering, my background is in computers, my background is linear. I think linearly. I think about a problem. How do you solve it? Linearly. I think of 10 things, and you can become easily overwhelmed. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, do I have to do all 10? And my argument is, let's prioritize. So let's take the 10 and say, all right, what can I do that would make you the happiest? So pick out of the 10 the things that would make you the happiest and say, if I don't get it, if I don't get it, I will be miserable. This is something you can do to make me really happy, and if I don't get it, I'm going to be really unhappy. So I say, I'm only going to meet one of your emotional needs, just one. But I'm not going to meet any of the rest. Which would you pick? That's your number one emotional need. And then you say, okay, I'll give you a second choice. You can have another choice. One more. The genie allows you two. What 2 things can I do? I will not do the other 8. You got to think about the other 8. Financial support, not going to get a job. If you don't pick financial support, no money coming from me. If you don't pick affection, I'm never going to hug you ever. So think about what I could do for you that would make you the happiest out of this list of 10. The genie's changed his mind. I'll give you 3. 3 choices. What would be the 3rd? What would be the 4th? What would be the 5th? And I say, you get 5 choices. You get 5 choices. And what I've discovered is that the 5 choices that men choose out of the 10 are different than the 5 choices that women choose out of the 10. And to me, I had no idea that it was coming. I had no thought that, yeah, this is the way it should turn out. No, I was surprised when I found that the research indicated that what women wanted the most in marriage, and by the way, this does not apply to every woman, not every man, each couple chooses their own 5 needs. Each one. You choose your own 5 needs. What can you do to make me the happiest? And in very rare incidents, a couple will choose the same 5 needs. Rare, but can happen. So if I say to a couple, you get 5 emotional needs met, And they say to me, okay, how do I do this? Because as a man, the things that I want the most, she doesn't care for as much. And the things that she wants the most, I don't care for as much. And so I've spent my career training men to meet needs that are not that important to them, and women to meet needs that are not that important to them. In other words, when I go into my marriage with Joyce here, the 5 needs that I picked, Joyce, these are the 5 things that I can do, that you can do for me that will really make me happy. And she looks at the list and says, well, those aren't the 5 things that would make me the happiest. I'm good at meeting needs that make me the happiest. I'm not as good at fulfilling needs that don't make me the happiest, or that I don't care about at all. And so my job as a counselor, as a marriage counselor, has been to train people to meet needs that they don't necessarily have. And that's a trick. That's a trick for everybody. And so we're going to be talking about honesty today, which is the 5th emotional need in the book. But I want you to understand something very clearly, and that is that the meeting of emotional needs is only one part of the equation. It's only one part. The second part is to not hurt each other. We're not going to talk about that today. That's in a book called Love Busters. How do you avoid hurting each other? 6 ways of hurting each other. Making demands of each other, being disrespectful toward each other, getting angry toward each other, being dishonest, which, of course, we're going to be talking about again today. Being independent, doing things without thinking about how the other person is going to behave, react to what we're doing. And the 6th, which will be something that almost all women in this group will say, yes, annoying habits. So basically, what we have in marriage is I don't want to do anything to hurt Joyce. And so I have to think about these 6 things, because almost every way of hurting her falls into one of those 6 categories. And then there's the issue of decision-making, conflict resolution. That's the 3rd category. And the 3rd category means that I have to see Joyce's perspective in every conflict that I've got. Every conflict Joyce and I have. And we have a conflict every hour we're together. Now, that doesn't mean we're fighting, doesn't mean we're arguing, it doesn't mean we're even unhappy about the conflict. It just means that, we don't agree. So now, how quickly can we come to an agreement once we've established the fact we have a conflict? Joyce and I are really good at conflict resolution. We get conflict solved sometimes within seconds. But it has a lot to do with, well, tell me what's your perspective on this? How can we come up with something creative that would solve this particular problem for both of us to be happy? Okay, that's my introduction. And I want you to know that I've written extensively on all of these things. I've written over 20 books. His Needs, Her Needs alone is in 28 languages now. And it supports Joyce and me, His Needs, Her Needs. It's still a very popular book. Came out in 1986, and is still among the top selling books in the United States. But the thing that I want you to understand about all of this is that my focus is something I haven't talked about yet. And if anybody knows me and my material, they would want to ask the question, why haven't you talked about romantic love? Because romantic love is really the center of my whole approach to marriage. What's interesting about everything I've talked about up to this point is that if you do it, you will have romantic love. Romantic love is a feeling of incredible attraction to somebody of the opposite sex, and as far as I'm concerned, it is something that is absolutely essential in having a great marriage. To be in love with your spouse is one of life's greatest experiences. You do that by doing the things that I've just talked about. Making each other happy. Avoiding making each other unhappy. Make your decisions so that both of you can be happy, okay? Now, I came up with a concept that I'm very well known for now, which is called the love bank. The love bank is a way that I've helped people understand how this works. The love bank is something that you have within you that whatever anybody does makes you make a deposit or a withdrawal in their account in your love bank. So basically, you have no control over it. You're born with it. You have within you a way of accounting for how other people make you feel. And so if somebody makes you feel good, they deposit love units. If they make you feel bad, they withdraw love units. If they have an account in your love bank where there are more deposits than withdrawals, you like that person. But there is a phenomenon that I've experienced personally, Joyce has experienced it, you've experienced, where if a person, especially of the opposite sex, makes enough deposits, they breach the romantic love threshold, and then they are in love. So you wake up one day and say, I can't stop thinking about this person. I am just in love. Well, the love bank inside of you has made enough deposits to breach the romantic love threshold. That's what it is. And then the next day, whatever that was, where did it go? Well, it went below the romantic love threshold. These things pop up and down. Joyce and I are fortunate enough to have made enough deposits that our love bank doesn't quite go up and down from the romantic love threshold, especially mine. My love bank, I think, is fuller than Joyce's love bank because I have more things to work on than she does, quite frankly. But the basic idea is that I have had a feeling of romantic love for Joyce for the 62 years we've been married and the 5 years that we dated. I've never lost it. Never once. Joyce will say to me every once in a while, and she may be kidding, but I'm not sure she is, that if we were still dating, I'd break up with you. That means that my account in her love bank has dropped below the romantic love threshold, but that I have to build the thing up really quick to do something. But I want you to understand the concept of the love bank. I want you to understand the concept of romantic love. I want you to understand the concept of marriage itself as a way of introducing you to this topic that we're going to be talking about today. One thing I might want to add is that the book that I've given you, I want you to read. I've given you this book. It is $25 retail, okay? You get it free. I want you to read it. And I want you to read it together. And I want, like Brian did, you use a highlighter. And the way you communicate to each other is one of you uses a yellow highlighter to express one spouse's feelings that I want you, my spouse, to read these sentences. So when you highlight something, it's not something for you to remember, it's something for your spouse to pay attention to. And then the other spouse has a blue highlighter. And those are the things that I want you to understand. I want you to understand. So basically, when you're done reading this book for the very first time, you'll have highlighters throughout the book. And I doubt seriously that you want to give the book away to anybody, because then they would get a lot of personal information that you might not want them to have about you. I don't want you to give away your books. I want you to keep them. I want you to have them the rest of your life. Many of the people that I have talked to over the years reads this book every year. They go from cover to cover every year. And then that way they keep their marriage fresh. They keep communicating with each other. This book is a great way to communicate. I am expressing what a woman wants her husband to do. I am expressing what a man wants his wife to do. And by reading this book, you will hear from your spouse, because your spouse will be saying to you, in whatever is underlined, this is what I want to communicate to you. So it's a great resource. The reason it's been popular since 1986 is because it works so well. It's been considered by many to be the best marriage book ever written, and of course, I really know that millions of marriages have been saved by people that have read his needs, her needs. So, let's talk about honesty and openness. I have long recognized that honesty and openness in marriage is absolutely crucial to a happy marriage. It does three things. Honesty and openness is an emotional need. When I am honest with Joyce, it makes her happy. It makes her happy to know that she gets the truth from me. Whenever she asks a question, she gets the honest truth. I have never lied to her. I've never deceived her. She trusts what I say. And because she trusts what I say, I'm making deposits in my account in her love bank every time she asks me a question, because she knows she will get a truthful response. Honesty and openness is important for a second reason. Dishonesty is a major love buster. Major love buster. If your spouse is dishonest with you even once, love bank withdrawals will come in a major form. And you may be not only extremely disappointed in your spouse, but notice that whatever you're feeling toward your spouse is suddenly disappearing. The third reason that honesty and openness is important is because you can't make good decisions together if you're not honest. If Joyce and I have to come to agreements about all of our conflicts, it would be very inappropriate for either one of us to tell the other person something that's not true. The question is, what's likely to be not true? What's likely to be not true is, it doesn't bother me when we do this. That's a lie, if it does bother you. So when you're negotiating, sometimes it'd be very easy to just let your spouse do anything they want. Whatever it is you want, honey, I just don't want to talk about this anymore. And that is a dishonest approach to problem solving. So honesty is extremely important in marriage because you make each other happy, having an honest relationship. If you're dishonest, you make each other very unhappy. And there's no hope of resolving your conflicts if you're not honest with each other. So I have a policy here called the policy of radical honesty. Reveal to your spouse as much information as yourself about yourself as you know, your thoughts, feelings, habits, likes, dislikes, personal history, daily activities, and plans for the future. I am an honest person, but the question really is, does Joyce really want to know my thoughts? I'm not sure. Maybe my thoughts would be something that would terrify her if she knew about them. Well, as it turns out, Joyce does know my thoughts, and she's still around. But the basic idea of sharing my inner thoughts, my basic reactions, who I am as a human being, does not come easy for me or for men in general. The idea of, here I am, a marriage counselor, I'm a therapist. I doubt seriously that I'd ever go to one. You know? I mean, I could have some horrible problems in my marriage, but I don't think I'd ever show up to one of these places. I do not want to reveal that much about myself. I just don't like that. When I was in high school, my dad wanted me to see a counselor for some reason, and the counselor said, whatever you tell me, I will keep it secret, private. I said, well, I wouldn't tell you anything I wouldn't tell everybody. In other words, I'm not going to tell you anything. You're not going to find out anything about me. And so you might think of me as sort of I'm an insulated person in many ways, but not in my marriage. Not in my marriage. Joyce knows everything about me. And I think that this policy of radical honesty is that she knows my thoughts, she knows my feelings, she knows my habits, she knows my likes and dislikes, she knows my personal history, daily activities, and plans for the future. She knows all of that. And she's still here. Isn't that amazing? She knows everything about me, and she's still married to me. Now, I will say this, that radical honesty falls into various categories, and so you have to think these things through. I talk about here thoughts, feelings. I break it down, though, into emotional honesty, historical honesty, current honesty, and future honesty. And this is in this handout that I gave you. Emotional honesty is very, very important in marriage because you have to be able to reveal to each other how you react to each other. One of the very most important things to do when you're first married, and when I do premarital counseling, I'm telling couples, there's not much I can do to help you now, but on the day of your marriage, I can start helping you. On the day you leave the business of being single, and now you're married, one of the things you have to do is accommodate each other's reactions. You have to listen to what the other person is saying about how you are affecting them. Because in a dating relationship, people tend not to do that very well, especially if they want to get married. They're not going to give each other exactly what they're thinking, it might scare the person away. But at the same time, if you really want to have a great marriage, you have to know how the person is reacting, how the person thinks, how the person judges you. Now, the basic idea that I wanted Joyce, first of all, you have to understand that when Joyce and I were dating, she was 14, I was 15, okay? I met her when she was 13, and she just about knocked my socks off. But she was already dating somebody else when she was 13. I had to wait a year, and I started dating her, and she broke up with me 6 times. 6 times. She never complained about anything. She never said anything to me that was negative about me. She never gave me her reactions. And when we were married, all that changed. All of a sudden, she had opinions. She had thoughts. Now I know how she was feeling about things. And fortunately, I made the right choice. I said, okay, look, we're married. I want to be the husband you need. I want to make you happy. I want to do things that make you feel good. I had a lot of ambitions at the time. I was going to first of all, I was going to become an MD. That was one choice. This is after I got my PhD. I got a free ride to USC. they'd give me $5,000 a year. Those days, a lot of money. All free. Get my MD from USC. So I come home to Joyce. I say, well, I got a great opportunity here. I'm going to get an MD. I'm going to go into neuroscience, and I'm going to become a neurologist. I'll become a brain surgeon. And she said, no, you're not. You're not doing that. No, why? Because you've had enough school now. Now we get back to the business of having a regular life. I don't want to do this anymore. I didn't do it. So then I thought, okay, Joyce, how about I work for American University that has universities all over the world. And they will hire me. I have a PhD in psychology. They will hire me. And I can go to any university I want for 2 years in any country I want. And we're going to start in Lebanon. Now, Lebanon at the time was a marvelous place to be. This was in the late 60s. Lebanon was wonderful. I got an offer to teach there in Lebanon. Let's go. No, we're not. We're not going to Lebanon. Okay. So I learned to discuss things with Joyce before I came up with ideas. To think about, okay, we moved from Santa Barbara, which we love Santa Barbara, to cold Minnesota. And Joyce was enthusiastic about the move. Enthusiastic. We did it with enthusiastic agreement. That same 1 month after we moved, her father died. 1 month after we moved. If she had come with great resentment, coming to Minnesota could have seriously impacted our marriage. So the fact that she was emotionally honest with me about moving to Minnesota saved us a lot of problems when her father died the next month. So I would say emotional honesty keeps you out of a great deal of trouble. And I'm kind of a visionary. I like to think ahead of things. I'm always starting new projects, new things. And whenever I start something, I ask Joyce about it before I even get started. How would you feel if I were to do something like this? And I have to get her enthusiastic agreement before I venture forth. And it's been that way throughout our entire lives. And this emotional honesty part is an extremely important part of honesty. Honesty is, first of all, you have the right to say, I don't like that idea. You have the right to refuse an idea. And then you say, let's brainstorm, let's try to think of alternatives to this that would make both of us happy. And you get into this routine where, how would you feel about this? Well, I don't think I'd care much about it. Okay, well then let's think of some alternatives. And right away you don't dig your heels in and you say, if you really cared about me, you would let me do what I want to do. That creates disaster in marriage. It's what I call independent behavior. It's one of the worst love busters there is, because what it does is it eventually leads to great separation between a husband and a wife, where they have nothing in common, they have no interest in common. Joyce had agreed to let me do what I want to do without considering her, we would have drifted apart. But because she's involved in all these decisions, she's integrated into the choice so that even the choice of moving to Minnesota, she has no resentment about that, in spite of the fact that her father died a month later. The next is historical honesty. Reveal information about your personal history, particularly events that demonstrate personal weakness or failure. I have on my website, marriagebuilders.com, a questionnaire section that you need to all pay attention to. And in that questionnaire section, first of all, before I get to the point I'm going to make, the first thing in the questionnaire section is an analysis of your marriage. An emotional needs questionnaire, a love busters questionnaire, and a marital problem analysis. Fill those things out for each other. When you get home, look up my website, marriagebuilders.com. The questionnaires are free. You can download them free. Download the emotional needs questionnaire, the love busters questionnaire, and the marital problem, and discover what you can do for each other that would make each other happy. What you can do for each other that would avoid making each other unhappy, and how you can come to decisions together that work for both of you. Fill out those questionnaires. Share them with each other. And the first thing you have to do in solving a problem is to understand the problem. And those 3 questionnaires will help you understand the problem. But the one I wanted to get to was the personal history questionnaire. So that's there. And if you fill that out for each other, you give each other an idea of what went on in your personal life. I'm kind of a genealogist at heart. I'm interested in knowing my background. I'm interested in knowing other people's backgrounds. The personal history questionnaire is a great way to understand each other's backgrounds and understand where you've been and what you've done and how you feel about what you're doing. And so basically, there should be nothing kept secret. You should tell each other everything. There are things in your history that are embarrassing. There are things about your history that your spouse would find very offensive, especially relationships with other people of the opposite sex before you were married. But those things, I think, need to be revealed. My attitude is, what is it that shouldn't be revealed in marriage? I can't think of anything. Well, what about characteristics that I have that could really hurt my spouse if my spouse were to know about it? That's a very good reason why she should know about it. But that she might leave me if she knew about it. She has a right to do that. You have a right to leave your spouse because of something that is in your spouse's background that is demonstratively dangerous. My basic feeling is that historical honesty gives people a sense of where the person has been, and the best predictor of the future is the past. So the more you know about the past, the more you're going to know about the future, or things you need to know to change radically to make sure that doesn't happen. Current honesty is the next. Reveal information about the events of your day. Provide your spouse with a calendar of your activities with special emphasis on those that may affect your spouse. Joyce has access to my browser. She can look at all of the places that I've been that day. I never erase any of my browsing history. She can look at my emails. She can look at the text messages I get. She can pick up my cell phone and just start scrolling through emails. She looks at this, she looks at that. It's curiosity for her. To some extent, it's wonderful that she has enough interest in me to know what I'm up to. And the basic idea is that I'm not going to do anything to hurt her. She knows that. I've never had an affair. But she's just curious to know, where have I been on the internet? But you know, that is a gigantic help to keep me out of trouble. Because one of the best ways to avoid getting yourself into trouble is knowing that everybody is looking. If I do things in secret, I'm going to get into trouble. If I do things openly, where I can be evaluated and I can be looked at, which I am now today with the books I've written and all, you should look up Willard F. Harley Jr. and see what people are saying about me. It's really interesting. I used to look at stuff like that. I decided I don't want to do that anymore. It's too depressing. But the basic idea that you can expose yourself to your spouse and be a better person because of it. One of the big problems that men have is pornography. If your spouse knows exactly where you are going on the internet and exactly what you're reading and exactly what you're doing and who you're talking to, the temptation to avoid pornography drops to almost zero. There's no excuse for pornography. A lot of men try to argue that this is just what men do. No. Nope. It's a form of unfaithfulness. It's a form of unfaithfulness, and it should be avoided at all costs. Well, current honesty really helps in that area. And then there's future honesty. I talked before about the fact that when we were first married, I had all kinds of plans for the future that I hadn't discussed with Joyce. And then when I finally said, okay, this is what I've decided to do, I'm going to do this. She says, no, you're not. Now I get reoriented. I say, okay, maybe I should have discussed it with you first. Yeah, maybe you should. And then we get into the routine of discussing things before I make the decisions. So future honesty is reveal your thoughts and plans regarding your future activities and objectives. Now, there is the problem of encouraging honesty. And I'd like you to look at the second page that I've given you. There's a little questionnaire here. If the truth is terribly upsetting to you, do you want your spouse to be honest and open only at a time when you are emotionally prepared? Interesting question. You might want to just be thinking yes or no. Do you keep some aspects of your life secret, and do you encourage your spouse to respect your privacy in these areas? Yes or no? Do you like to create a certain mystery between you and your spouse? Yes or no? Are there subjects or situations about which you would want to avoid radical honesty? Do you ever make selfish demands when your spouse is open and honest with you? Do you ever make disrespectful judgments when your spouse is open and honest with you? Do you ever have angry outbursts when your spouse is honest and open with you? The first four of these have to do with values. First four are values issues. Because what you're saying is that I don't really believe in radical honesty, and my attitude is then you don't believe in honesty. There is no middle ground on honesty. Either you're honest or you're not honest. Either you're honest or you're dishonest. And so there are excuses for not being honest. Well, my spouse is very fragile. If I were to be honest with my spouse might have a nervous breakdown. She might be crying for 5 days if I were to be honest. I say, no, she won't. If you're dishonest, she's going to cry for 5 days. Basically, honesty creates mental stability in people. It does not destroy a person's ability to cope with life. Dishonesty is what destroys a person's ability to cope in life. So you look at these questions here, and the answer should always be no. The answer should be no to all these. If the answer is yes to any of them, you're dishonest. And I've always thought, I use the term radical honesty. Radical? It's not radical, it's honest. It's just being honest. Truth is not your enemy. Truth is there to help you navigate through this very complex life that we live in, especially we as Christians. We come to Christ knowing that we are weak. We come to Christ knowing that we have sinned. We know that Jesus Christ died for our sins because we're sinners. If we weren't sinners, Christ wouldn't need to die. But the point is, if I'm honest, if I'm radically honest, my sins are harder to do. It's harder for me to do something sinful if I'm radically honest. I am protected by my honesty. A few more minutes left. I don't think I can get through all this stuff, but I'll try. Let me point something else out to you. One other point I wanted to make here was that not only do you have to value honesty, but you also don't punish honesty. 5, 6, 7, and 8 has you punishing honesty and openness, okay? I mean, when your spouse then is honest with you, do you fly into a rage? Well, as honest as your spouse might want to be, he might look at that reaction and think twice before he starts explaining why you didn't come home at 5:30 or 5, whatever you were. I don't think I want to come home right now. And then you go home and you tell your wife, I just didn't feel like coming home. See, I mean, it would have helped him come home on time knowing that he would have to tell her why he didn't come home. But let's suppose she flies into a rage. See, then then he says, okay, I'm going to think twice before telling her why I'm not coming home. The other thing would be being disrespectful. Let's suppose she's just disrespectful to him when he explains something that he's doing, or demanding when he explains. You want to encourage honesty for your spouse. You want to be honest toward each other, but you want to encourage honesty. Now, there's 3 types of dishonesty. And so I have helped people with dishonesty. I have, as a psychologist, I have counseled people with all kinds of problems. And dishonesty is a major problem in life, especially among criminals. I mean, here I am counseling a criminal, a bank robber, we'll say. I've counseled bank robbers, actually. And I've counseled murderers, and I've counseled thieves, and I've counseled all kinds of people that have done horrible things. Honesty is a big issue for these people. Honesty is a big problem. So what I've done is I've kind of come in, I've categorized dishonesty. And one of the most important types of dishonesty is avoiding trouble. It's the third one I've got there on the list. People avoid being dishonest because they don't want to get themselves in trouble. They do something they shouldn't be doing, but what it does is, if I tell anybody about it, I'm going to get into trouble. Very, very common. Children are all that way. The idea that children are sinless isn't true. They are dishonest right out of the box, and they will tell you a little story about something that happened that had nothing to do with reality because they would get into trouble if they did. So it's very common. You have the protection kind of dishonesty where I'm not telling my wife the truth. Something horrible happened to us today financially, and if I tell her the truth, you won't be able to sleep tonight, so I'm not going to tell her what happened today. That's protection dishonesty. And then there is the looking good dishonesty. Making yourself look better than you are. Telling people about things that you've done that you never did. These are common problems with dishonesty. And the question is, how do you treat people like this? What do you do? How do you get them to not be dishonest? It's a habit. And so if your spouse is predictably dishonest, it is something that you really need to focus on. The spouse that is dishonest needs to focus on it, needs to think about every area of their dishonesty, and they need to confess. Now, among the Catholics, you go to a priest to confess. And the priest isn't supposed to tell anybody about what you're confessing. And then the priest gives you absolution. I believe if you have something to confess, you go to your spouse. You tell your spouse about it. Your spouse is not going to let you get off quite so easily. Your spouse is not going to say, you are absolved. Your spouse is going to say, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to avoid this problem in the future? And so the basic idea of solving problems in life is exposing the problem and letting people know you've got the problem. And then recognizing that whenever it happens, you go to somebody to hold you accountable. I think accountability is gigantic in life. Who do you go to hold you personally accountable for things you're doing that are wrong? Well, the spouse is generally the number one person that should know. But if it's things you've done against your spouse, like infidelity, then you probably need somebody else to also help you avoid making the same mistake. Okay, we've only got a few more minutes. There are things that I have in this that I'd like you to read. You'll notice that there is a little section. On the policy of joint agreement. Don't have time to go into it, but I'd like you to read it. I'd like you to read my parable of the fisherman. I made it up. It's nothing that Jesus would have said, of course. But on the other hand, I think you might find it interesting. Questions in the short period of time I've got left. Anybody have a question? Come on, don't be shy. Yeah. So is anything I've said, I love debate. I used to be on a debate team in college. And I love to argue with people. Not Joyce. I don't argue with Joyce. Yes.
All right, John, I'm going to bring this back to you because
Here we have
we're
somebody who wants to
recording
argue
and
with
somebody
me.
can hear you then. So I know. It's all good.
This historical honesty one, you said that looking at somebody's past will most likely tell them the future or tell you the future. If you looked at my past, you won't be able to tell the future. How would you
Put closer to your...
How would you be able to tell? I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to get to.
I know what you're getting to. Want me to help you?
Yeah.
All right, so John has had like an amazing transformation in his life. Jesus has
Yes,
done
and
some amazing things.
I believe in the transformation that the Holy Spirit can make in people. But I would also say that you have DNA. And any problems that you may have had in the past are likely to come up again in the future, and you should take special precautions to avoid that. So when people say to me, yes, I had this affair, but it's never going to happen again. My attitude is we need to have extraordinary precautions to make sure that the conditions under which that affair took place never occurs again. I feel the same way about alcohol and drug dependency. I ran 10 treatment centers for drug and dependency. And what we do is we take alcohol and drugs out of the equation. How do we make it impossible to get? How do you do that? Because we do not want the temptations to cause you to stumble. We want to get rid of the temptations. So I'd say that whatever it was that triggered bad behavior in the past, you are probably doing quite a few things to avoid those triggers. Would you say? No. In other words, you're still, you got the same friends that are selling drugs, and you're helping them out. You know, you're trying to witness to them as they are going to the street corner. No, I mean, really, I think you have done some things to change the course of your future. And that's what I'm talking about. I say, when I know that I'm tempted to do a particular thing, I'm not going to put myself in a position where I won't be able to resist temptation. And I have to tell Joyce about it. I don't put myself in those positions. I don't take those chances. And then that way I stay out of trouble. Time's up.
All right. Let's thank Dr. Harley. Guys, the books that you've received today are a gift from the Harleys. I mean, that's just out of the goodness of their heart, and what an incredible gift. So turn it back over to the Teals.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Brian, too, for spending the morning with us and your words. And so as we promised on the email, there are a few giveaways. And so I would hate to not follow. I'm being radically honest, right? Is that a good, that I, okay, whatever. All right, so you're going to draw names.
Yeah, so my job was to read the names, so
Jim Teal.
I apologize in advance if I say it wrong. Well, I
Oh,
wouldn't
and
have
then,
chosen it.
and then
I'm just being honest.
you're just being honest. And you guys can come up, and it's by couple, come up and pick whatever bag you want.
Joanne and Jim Lausma. So you guys can come up and pick.
You're going to take the leftovers? That's one way of saying that, right? The last one. They're not.
They're not here?
No, they're not here.
You got to be present to win.
Right. You're welcome.
Judy and Jim Orrock. You can shake them, all kinds of stuff, yeah.
Oh,
They're
well,
not here either.
no, I didn't see him. Nope. Yep, they're here.
Julie and Scott Kritzer. Two more left.
Two more. You're not supposed to tell. That was a secret.
Al and Kathy Carlson.
Are they still here? Oh, yeah, they're over there. I knew I saw them.
Last but not least, Amanda and Gary Newhard. All right, well, we want to thank everybody for coming today, for sharing your morning. We want to thank again Pastor Brian and Dr. Harley for their words. There's certainly a lot for us to take home today. You got the books to take home, something physical. Don't let it go on your bookshelf or on your coffee table. Dive right into that book. It's excellent. Otherwise, there's plenty of coffee and food still out there. You don't have to rush out the door. You can stay. You can mingle. You can try to get another bingo, but we won't give you another card for it. But you can still do that if you wanted to. Otherwise, thank you guys for coming.
voices in my mind that say I'm not enough. Every single lie that tells me I will never measure up. Am I more than just the sum of every high and every low? Remind me once again just who I am, because I need to know. Ooh, oh, you say I'm loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I'm weak. And you say I am held when I am falling short. And when I don't belong, oh, you say I am yours. And I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe the only thing that matters now is everything you think of me. In you I find my worth, in you I find my identity. Ooh, oh, you say I'm loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I'm weak. And you say I am held when I am falling short. When I don't belong, oh, you say I am yours. And I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. Oh, I believe. Taking all I have and now I'm laying it at your feet. You'll have every failure, God. You'll have every victory. Ooh, oh, you say I am loved when I can't feel a thing. You say I am strong when I think I am weak. You say I am held when I am falling short. When I don't belong, oh, you say I'm yours. And I believe, oh, I believe what you say of me. I believe, oh, I believe, yes, I believe what you say of me. I believe. You spent so many sleepless nights, worries racing through your mind. You're breaking, is your soul aching? You've got all this shame inside, the kind that people try to hide. You're hurting, are you searching? Well, I know there's a place you can lay all your burdens down. Take it to the cross, take it to the Savior, lay it at the feet of the mercy giver. Take it to the one who can wash your sin. Savior. Lay it at the feet of the mercy giver. Take it to the one who can wash your sins away. There's healing in his holy name. Call me the one who can break your chains. If you got pain, if you feel lost, if you want that burden off, take it to the cross, yeah. What can wash away our sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. What can make us whole again? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Take it to the cross.